So today on Young Leaders in Tech podcast, we have Céiteach Stiofán, who is a manager in Accenture's talent and organisation practice, and Karen Henry, who is marketing manager, also in Accenture, and they're here to talk about storytelling in tech. Guys, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
No worries. So instead of me droning on about what you do, I'm going to give you the floor now to start so you can tell me exactly what you're here to speak about and how it can benefit the people coming into the podcast. Do you want to start with that, Céiteach?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, if there's one thing when you're listening to this podcast that we want to help you out with is that by the end of this podcast, we have in some way demystified what is storytelling. So to help give you that nudge to be an even better storyteller. So I'd like you to remember one kind of key thing, which is that you're already a really good storyteller. We tell stories every single day. All that Karen and I do that's a little bit different is we apply the best of stories to kind of business type challenges or IT type challenges. But like all the fundamentals are there. The type of stories you tell at the weekend in particular, with all the energy and enthusiasm and the actions that you would. These are the type of things that we want to help you tell even better during the weekdays.
Yeah, Karen, anything to add to that?
Couldn't improve upon that. We are all storytellers. Absolute key message.
Yeah, cool. So like Céiteach gave me a good bit of reading material before this, and I've been reading up in it. And in a lot of the pre-reading I have done around the topic, there's a reference to a study by Dr. Albert Mehrabian. What's this study about and what relevance does it have to us? Karen, you seem to want to answer that one first, I think.
No, the Mehrabian study is probably the most well-known. It's often quoted is that words account for just 7% of communication, and the rest then is it's visual, it's tone, it's body language, all that kind of stuff. In the virtual age we're in now, I think that's really interesting because obviously right now we've got a video, right? So you've got that element of it, but it does show how important stuff like your tone becomes more important. So many of us now are just on voice calls.
Yeah.
Even something like a headshot suddenly is more important because it's the only visual you have to go with what you're saying. But it does show that, those studies show that you can say something negative and be smiling at people and, they'll see the smiling and they won't really get the negative stuff. So that's the importance is that we kind of focus so much on our words and really the story so much is the presenter is the story. So much of it is how we convey it, the passion that we feel and the emotions that we can evoke when we communicate.
It's a really great study. Like that was the one that I came across first in the book Weekend Language, and it also helps us out with storytelling that there's 3 ways we communicate that Karen has so eloquently covered, which is voice, and then tone and body. But that number 3 is really, really good. We're going to touch on it right throughout this. Why 3 is a really, really good number with storytelling. I always love the one with tone that I go, all of us potentially who are in the professional world might say at the end of one of those long meetings that we're all on, I always go, do we have agreement? Or I just change my tone and go, do we have agreement?
Yeah.
Trying to get a decision made, I'll drop the decibel or the voice a little bit, and that kind of more stern voice in your tone can say an awful lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of leads me into the PowerPoints and the pitches. Everyone in the corporate setting knows about the phrase "death by PowerPoint," and like you were telling me that this is all about trying to avoid that, and how can you use storytelling to avoid things like that?
Yeah, so I might kick off on this one. Again, a person I mentioned, Andy Craig, who wrote the book Weekend Language. Another brilliant book is by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick that Karen introduced me to initially. I suppose if you think about it since like the 1980s when Microsoft or kind of PowerPoint maybe came about, it was definitely new and novel at the start. I suppose it's kind of become business as usual to just have a PowerPoint and to kind of spend all of our time perfecting our slides, that we need to get slides correct for a meeting. Now, you have to be good at PowerPoint, like it's a good thing to have, but it's to remember the impact that it has. What I've noticed is the amount of attention people put onto PowerPoint, and the great thing with storytelling it is that it's actually all about your audience, not about your slides. It's not about perfecting the slides. And a brilliant analogy that I read only last night about it was, and analogies are a really good thing within storytelling. So if a skill of a good storyteller is to understand maybe something complex and to be able to translate that across. So some of the best speakers that will be, if you think of who's the best speaker you know, if you're listening to this now, I can guarantee you that probably one of the reasons they're such a good speaker is that they make things sound so simple. There was a great one, without getting too far into the political arena, but Barack Obama said when he was running during his last election that he brought along, or his first election, he brought along former President Clinton, because he's the secretary for explaining things.
Yeah.
He gets things across really, really well. And the best analogy that I've come across for like PowerPoint slides and a story that you want to tell, or the next presentation you want to get across, is that if you're really worrying about your PowerPoint slides and trying to perfect them, it's like trying to perfect the icing before you've even got the recipe for the cake.
Okay. And
that stuck with me. So it's like, from now on, what I'd say, if you do one thing after listening to this podcast, spend 80% of your time focusing on getting your key message across to your audience, thinking about how they would like to receive that message, how you can engage them differently, make it a bit more memorable and relatable, instead of trying to perfect your slides. Your slides, the version 1 can often be pretty good.
Yeah. Karen, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it, is to be purposeful, to be intentional. And that's what we do with the storytelling. Simon Sinek says, start with why. And storytelling, it's very much the same thing. It's, why are you telling the story? Who's your audience? What's the overarching point? And start with that, with the recipe, before you start with, or start with the vision of the cake, even, and the people who are going to eat it, before you start on the icing. But another way to do the storytelling is, if you have your story, is then you can do the visuals. So I worked with somebody internally here, for example, who's talking about personalization, and the problem was people weren't really getting it. And so we worked on an analogy where he tells a true story of, he goes in every day and they say, hey, here's your copy. And that's the experience that you can get with the personalization technology. So what we did for the slides then was we had the copy, a generic coffee cup, and then the bit of animation, and the generic coffee cup became the one with all the ticks of all the specific type of coffee that this person liked to get, and it was ready when he walked into the coffee shop, waiting for him instead of having to ask for it. And that's the kind of the story, and the analogy was the coffee, but it was reinforced in the slides visually. So it was all visual, and just kind of to reinforce the message with the visuals, rather than some sort of a generic sort of a swirl or whatever, or heaven forbid, loads of words on a slide.
Yeah.
Before, and the thing about words on a slide, to add to that, is John, you actually asked me, how can you tell a story without using PowerPoint? I realized I went off on one of my famous tangents, but how? So, like, some actual tips for a person listening for like their next presentation. Key one is, who's going to be in the room? Who are you presenting to? If it's a pitch at your local GA club, if it's a pitch at that you're trying to do, or a presentation you're trying to do at work, try and talk to the people in advance of that meeting where possible, and ask them one question. What's the one thing you'd like to get from my presentation tomorrow? I'm trying to put it together, prep it correctly, and if there's one key thing you want me to cover or to conclude on, what is that? And the generic question that I always go with is, just think, let's say if I'm preparing a presentation for one of my colleagues, Siobhan, I go, what's in it for me? As in, what's in it for Siobhan? As in, how does this impact Siobhan? That's a really good way to do it. And like another little one that I always do is, it depends. You could be presenting on screen, you could be presenting in person, whatever way it is, typically on screen nowadays or on a call. But at this, like even before a meeting started, I can remember one time, an anecdote. I was about to present to about 100 people in Texas. And what I did was, I was standing at the back of the room to wait to listen to the previous presentation. And there was just a few people standing at the back. And I just asked one person at it, I was like, I hear storytelling's up next. what would you love to get from that? And it was like, well, how can I apply it to my daily job? So I got up and started by going, there's one kind of key thing I'm going to cover here. It's how you can apply this to your daily job. And thanks a million to John for the little tip in advance. Like immediate connection. But what's in it for me and how can I apply it? Whatever concept you have, they're good things to consider. And to finish on it, when I'm doing any presentation to back up what Karen said is, I use I like numbers. So I go, what's the one key thing you want to get across? Break it down into 3 key points and then remind them at the end of that one key thing.
Yeah, cool. And before we move on to the why of the storytelling, as you were explaining to me before, we just split it up into the what, the why, and the who and the how. But what other aspects are there to storytelling in tech? I presume, or I may be presuming wrong, but it's not just all about pitching and presentations, right? Karen, yourself?
Totally. Look, come here. What I would say is, I suppose I'll give you a little example, all right? That so a lot of the time that I'm working in tech, I work with a lot of technical architects, solution architects, people who know an awful lot more about back ends and front ends than me. And they are they're like the guardians of IT. If any change goes to go through, they're like the ones like the Gandalf or whoever, like thou shalt not pass. But even like dramatizing it up in a nice way into kind of a storyline is a really good thing to do. And this is something that Karen introduced me to as well. But there's story plots. So without doing presentations or without doing anything else, I'm actually trying to lose weight at the minute, okay? And what I say is that I am on my quest to hit 88 kilograms. Now, I have a long way to go to get there, but I'm about halfway there at the minute. But even in my own language on a daily basis, by saying I'm on a quest, it tends to spark our brain to, like, I don't know if it's an Indiana Jones movie looking for the Holy Grail, or if it's, going for that North Star. But that's even just without doing any presentations, but trying to kind of build a bit of momentum or get people to listen in more to a story. Having a bit of a plot can help.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I guess we're telling stories all the time, so much business is not done at a meeting or at a presentation. You're chatting with people beforehand that, stuff like likability. It's such a huge factor. You see it everywhere in politics, business, everywhere. And storytelling can really help with likability. For example, my husband and I laugh a lot about backstories because we kind of, joke about creating them. But people who have their backstory nailed, like, it's so compelling, there was a personal interest I have is in interior design. And there's a TV program in Ireland last night called Cheap Irish Homes. I don't even have a TV. I don't watch TV. It's the one program I've watched in last ages because it really appeals to me, renovating a cheap home. And what I was really struck by was how they worked on the backstory of the lady who presented it. She was compelling, she was authentic. It was a small, simple little program, but the backstory was very well created and very well curated, and it was very consistently conveyed by her on Instagram and in any other promo that I happen to have seen. So that's something that's really important, is your own personal backstory. You can to weave your story, and what you do with that, well, it should be your LinkedIn description for one thing. Have it in a one-liner. People talk about an elevator pitch.
Yep.
Much prefer the kind of story aspect of it. So it can be really used for the likability factor, and just in general conversations as well, and meeting and kind of convincing and converting people, as we would say in marketing.
Yes, that kind of leads me on to a line I found in the Weekend Language book. So it kind of struck home with me. It was one that said, "You are the presentation, not your slides." So one angle I take on this is that my own presentations, that if you regularly have too much information on your slides, people who are watching the presentation, they'll tune out. They'll assume they'll be able to look at the slides for the information after the meeting. Is that the right take on that, or what do you think, Karen? I'll stick with you.
Yeah, and I feel, as Céiteach will know, I feel pretty strongly about this, and death by PowerPoint in general. I think that the thing is that all of us, we try to make our poor PowerPoint presentations do too much. We want them to be a standalone document that is perfectly understandable when it's read by somebody alone on a screen or in print. And we also want it to be an appropriate accompaniment to an audio track. And it just, I'm sorry, listeners, that is very rarely going to work well, because we all know that we read about 3-4 times quicker than people can speak. And so you've got a dissonance where your eyes are taking in, even if, heaven forbid, you read out the actual words in the slide, as opposed to kind of providing a narrative. It's still, even if they're the same words, they're coming into your brain. The stimulus, the cognitive stimulus, the auditory and the visual are clashing because they're not coming at the same time. So what you really want is, if you really must have words on your slides, very few of them, have them pause for a moment, say, I'll just give you a moment to have a look at that. And then you move on and give people, like, the amount of time you flick to read it, give them that, if you really have to have something to read. And I know it's a challenge, but an awful lot of us, we kind of use PowerPoint maybe as a prompt, because you have to speak for 30 minutes, you want to remember everything. And I think that's fair enough, but really try and reduce it down to visuals. So if you can get data points, if you can use icons, if you can use maybe 1 or 2 words, and a common kind of pushback that we get here as well is because it's a really fast moving corporate environment, and you present your stuff and somebody wants a copy, so it's a little bit extra work, but there's a few different things you can do to really kind of get that sweet spot. Ideal scenario for me is create 2 versions, one which is a standalone, effectively a document in PowerPoint format that can be distributed after the meeting, have it ready in advance. That's the ideal, but most people, that's probably a step too far. But what you can do, 2 other kind of options that work really well, is you can intersperse your presentation slides with slides that are text heavy and hide the text heavy slides.
Yeah.
So you can have your visual, then have your hidden slide, visual hidden slide. So when they read through it, they'll see the text because it'll display, but it won't throw them off when you're presenting. And the alternative kind of version is to put that same information in the notes section of the slide as well. So there are kind of just a few kind of ways that you can keep down the text on the slide and still get the message over to people.
There was one as well alongside that, what you're just after recommending with the hiding, but there was one with the B button that blanks the slides out while you're so I didn't even know either of these. I never even looked for them. I wouldn't have even thought about these, but if like someone asks a question and you don't want to leave a slide up on the screen for too long because people will just keep looking at the slide instead of listening to you, just blank it. Press the B button to blank it out. That's a really interesting one that I'd imagine not many people would know about.
They do if they've been to any of Céiteach's presentations, because he uses that all the time. But it's a great one because, in fairness, that we all do it and we all read ahead. And I know the kind of original, if you remember the originally PowerPoint, it had this kind of, animation. So like bullet point, but, that's pretty painful stuff as well. Like, it's just, kids just say, no, don't use the words. You think of it visual, and it's fun then, and if you have your analogy, if you have kind of a through line, if you have a key point, it kind of forces you as well to stick to the point. Look, as Céiteach said, there are 3 things I want to do today. Okay, so 3 pictures then, and a summary slide with the 3 pictures, a slide each with the 3 of them, and maybe a couple of words and a wrap. It's a good discipline as well, and it really, really works. Then you become the presentation because they're listening to you. I mean, otherwise, why would you even bother? Just read it, read the book, read the slide, read whatever. What's the point? Really, everybody's here for you. If you're presenting, if you're giving a status report, if you're leading a meeting, you are the reason we're all here. For this 5 minutes or for the 2 hours or however long you're speaking, you're the person, because otherwise we could just read it. We're all kind of pretty good at reading.
Yeah. Céiteach, anything to add on that part?
Like the B button, absolutely brilliant. The key thing is, or if you have one of those clickers, it's usually like there's usually 4 buttons on a clicker, left, right, or you can imagine it's the south button on a clicker. Hit that, and it'll put your slides back. The key thing to do is to tell the people who are organizing the event that you're going to hit B, because I did this before. I could see backstage was people scurrying, being like, the slides are not working. So I clicked it again to it. But it's brilliant when you get people settled in. Like, you have to get people to listen to you. You could have the best story to tell in the world. What we have to remember is we have to earn our audience's attention, especially nowadays when we can be multitasking at 10 different things going off everywhere. You got to earn people's attention. So disrupt it up, change it up a bit when a meeting starts, you know? And that's a really good way to do it, because people are like, it's black. And to kind of come back to your point, John, it's like, you know, you are the presentation. Kind of shows you own the room as well. You know, if this person's in control, you look like a bit more of the alpha of your desired gender, and that makes you look in control. And that's a good thing to do as well.
Cool. Yeah. Karen, you mentioned there the word cognitive. What is meant by cognitive, just for listeners? And can you give me an example of why it's important? Cognitive.
Yeah, sure. You know, disclaimer, not saying in any way expert, really studying, you know, doing education masters, where I really got to understand a little bit more the kind of the brain processing, how we process information and retain it, and we can reuse it and that kind of stuff. But it's how your brain processes information, and stepping away from the kind of serious brain science into an area that, you know, not everybody kind of regards very highly, but I certainly think is very impactful, is the area of neurolinguistic programming. So that's NLP. And so it's neuro, your brain, linguistic, the impact of words in your brain. And I really believe it very much, because I can see it all the time, the impact of it. I see it, you know, for better or for worse. I see it in politics all the time right now. You kind of go, you know, why do people believe that? Why are they behaving like that? Well, they're behaving because those cognitive buttons have been pressed, and they've been pressed with words. And so we're talking about storytelling. You know, a lot of it is obviously to do with words. I know you've said the impact of visuals and presentations, but I suppose the original kind of storytelling, well, of course it was oral originally, but what we're probably most used to are books. And so, you know, the words are really important for, you know, having an impact on our brain. So even small things like, if you use sensory language, you know, like juicy, you know, zippy, sort of onomatopoeic words that kind of suggest what they are, they can really make us feel that. And they've done these studies. So the reason, I suppose, for storytelling being so popular and in technology and in kind of very progressive organizations is because brain science is now confirming what kind of traditional wisdom we've always known about. And so that's the use, for example, of sensory words. They can put, you know, you've seen they put those caps on their brains, and they can actually track the neural activity, and they can see that if you hear a story, or a story that's well constructed and well conveyed, that people feel they behave as if they had the experience. Okay. You know, physiologically, they behave as if they have the experience. Like, it's such a powerful tool to have, you know, if you can really crack into the brain, like using words.
And a lot of people say that the first 2 minutes of a presentation are the cognitive hallowed ground. Is that, like, you'd agree with that? Céiteach, you're nodding away there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say, like, your opening statement in the first 10 seconds is so important. Like, the first thing you say to kind of capture their attention when they're settled. But like, after 2 minutes, if we think about technology, it's almost like the tech locks that you're locked out, your password's expired, you cannot get in to this presentation any longer, your audience is gone after 2 minutes. Absolutely. So some of the tips, like for your own presentation, is if people ever feel like nervous telling a story or anything, it's like practice the first thing you're going to say. What's the key line that you want to get across? And some ways to do that, by the way, to help you out. And you'd pick these up in like general life all the time, particularly if you're from Ireland. You've a definite advantage being Irish as a storyteller, because it's such an ingrained part of our culture. Like, the longer you look back into Irish history, we hear of Shanakees, both male and female, in every village in Ireland. Like, my grandmother was a brilliant storyteller. So it's in Ireland, like, we're kind of doing it all the time. But a great one to say is true story, John. Tend to kind of go, okay, hang on, now it has to be a true story, but kind of like a signal. It's like, okay, I'm going to kind of listen in here. or let me tell you why this is important, or here's the one thing that's going to change the way you're thinking for the next 10 years. Now, it has to be good. That's kind of like you'll catch the attention with that. So that's why within the first 2 minutes, what I always try to do is say, so John, the one thing you're going to learn from today's session is how to be a better storyteller. And I'm going to break that up into 3 ways. We'll go through the how, the why, and the what, and maybe even a bit of the who. And then at the end of it, we'll clarify anything like that. You get that across early on. What's in it for John?
Yeah.
Like really important. And I think you'd be lucky to get 2 minutes. Your audience would be very nice to you to give you 2 minutes before they zone out.
Yeah. We'll try to squeeze in one quick who here while we have a chance. But you mentioned before when I was chatting to you about the tech companies, other tech companies that people might not know about, or that they kind of maybe just they've seen them but they don't realize they're using storytelling. Which have you any examples of them?
Oh yeah, this is one since I was very young. So Steve Jobs, my younger brother James was like much more into technology than me when I was younger. So he was really into the Apple brand, like really, really into the Apple brand. And to this day is still into the Apple brand. Now, working in technology, the more I learn about it and the more people I talk to who are experts in technology, I always ask them, are you Apple or Android? And this is just me, but I find out that what I've learned, this is only anecdotal, is that people that know an awful lot about technology, I'm starting to see sometimes tend towards Android. But the entire thing, if you look at the Steve Jobs movie even, I was so disappointed looking at it because I love hearing good stories. But if you look at that movie, there was 3 big speeches that Jobs was preparing for. And he nearly drove himself to the edge trying to prep for each of those big ceremonies, big presentations. What happened was, though, for me, Apple became like a following. It became this thing that people bought into the brand. And for someone who's not an expert in tech, the more I get into it, the more I realize, is it that Apple is just so much better technologically than everybody else? And for me, it's more the case that Apple's story is so good. It's so, so good. How they used to put their launches together. And I'm talking about the heyday of Jobs, that for me, storytelling gave Apple an edge and made them even more like billions ahead of it, like with people queuing up to get it. Like it was. So for me anyway, Steve Jobs is always the person that when I think about storytelling in tech, one of the real pioneers of it, and there have been many more prior to him and since, but definitely Jobs is one that for me nailed the power of storytelling and did it really, really well.
Yeah. And there's one that the example that everyone kind of uses as well. They were saying that Bill Gates used to be a terrible storyteller. He used to rely heavily on PowerPoint, possibly because it was his own product. But everyone uses the story about him with the malaria talk, the TED talk, as an example of one time where he nailed it, just grabbing the audience attention and stuff like that. But that kind of adds to the Weekend Language book. It says to use the word imagine if you're trying to use anecdotes. If you haven't actually got a real life case study, or if you haven't a good story to compare to use the word imagine. How can this help?
So I just take that straight away. I know Karen's going to have loads as well. But if you're ever trying to pitch to somebody a future state as well, do you know people are trying to sell something? And to be honest with you, there's a great phrase, by the way: facts tell and stories sell. Now, you may be in a job where you're not like chasing a target, like, or a quota to sell technology. But if you're working, like I was working with technical architects, I was trying to sell a change to them, to their like IT estate, why it was important. So we're all selling like all the time. But so just remember that stories can kind of really help you sell. Now, what I do all the time is, let's say, John, I just go, John, imagine after this podcast is finished, that your podcast goes to number 1 in the Irish podcast chart.
Yep.
All it does, the word imagine, it buys, as a presenter, as a storyteller, you really tend to engage the the member in the audience or the audience themselves. And I always use a first name as well. I try to do that as much as possible. And to build on what Karen was saying about about the whole cognitive side, the word imagine tends to transport us up to like free space in our brain. It's like saying once upon a time or fado and Aaron. You're kind of like, people are just going to sit back and listen. And that's where the word imagine helps us understand why storytelling is cognitive hacking in the digital age. I use it a lot. Yes, it's good for anecdotes. It's really good if you're trying to explain, the rationale why we need to do this. Imagine you could be there. The last one I'll do, I remember one of my colleagues, Emma, was trying to pitch a new kind of change solution to a more senior person. And I just told her to kind of start it like this. We were just like looking through, and I was like, imagine it's Friday morning. You're driving in, you park the car, you somehow get ahead of the traffic, and you're drinking your favorite coffee in the office, and you open the Irish Times, and there's your name in front of it saying, you are now, the best person in tech in Ireland. So it has this magical quality, and it works really good with children as well. I have two nephews. I use this, imagine, and they're like, they love it. So yeah, I use the word imagine way too much, but it's a really, really powerful word.
Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, it's a magic word.
Yeah,
it transports us. Yeah.
Cool. There's another one. I'm using the weekend language a lot because I haven't got to Chip and Dan's book yet. But I was reading that before this. So they're saying so what? Who cares? How can focusing on that help? I'll go with you, Karen, for that one.
Yeah, it's back to the why.
Yeah.
Once again, it is, and we really do tend to, all of us, just human, just to lose track of what we're doing, and we really kind of fall in love with the details. And personally speaking, as well as Stephanie and I do a lot of writing as well, and it's very hard to kind of write something or create something and then edit it out. But the most important part of any kind of writing really is the editing. It is that cutting out, and so that's the so what, who cares. If you can keep focusing on that, it is the one that goes like, okay, I'll cut that. Who am I speaking to? What's my point? That's it. Nothing else. Just everything else. Just, you got to cut it out. And the more you cut stuff out, the more your audience will appreciate it. One of my favorite quotes is, I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I've written you a long one. Blaise Pascal. Attributed to Mark Twain, like pretty much every other pithy quote is not attributed to Oscar Wilde, but that's another story.
Cheers. And I think one of the main problems that people have when presenting or when they're pitching in front of their peers or managers is nerves. How does someone combat that in these scenarios?
Yeah, so I would say with anything and with good stories is practice, practice, practice. My poor wife, Emily, has heard so many stories that I've been trying to pitch and everything else. But when it comes to so what and who cares, it's actually good to get somebody who's outside of your loop when it comes to the story you're trying to tell, particularly maybe a housemate, that but you mightn't be in the same industry. Or even I had to do an exercise the other day to try and explain my job to my grandmother. And it's a really good thing to do because you have to kind of think about that. But what I'd say with nerves, this is a tip that Karen gave me. And Karen and I have been very lucky over the last 2.5 years. We've put together storytelling content that has now been delivered to over 4,500 people globally, as far as from Bangalore to Texas and nearly everywhere in between. And what I would say is focus on yourself. I know I'm saying here, like, you need to do it with your audience, but when it comes to nerves, what I'd like you to do, maybe even now, okay, people listening to the podcast, think about what are the physical symptoms of being nervous. Like, what does it actually feel like to be nervous? What's your body doing?
Probably heart rate. I don't know, maybe biting your nails. Yeah.
Totally. I'm definitely one for that. Those physical symptoms of being nervous, we've asked this question lots. And in terms of the responses that have come back, this magical thing has happened. There's a person called Marshall Mathers, also known as Eminem, who has a really cool song called 8 Mile. And I used to use it before I'd attempt to play a sports match. If you listen closely to those words, what you hear at the start of the song is, so I've got one chance. I don't want to mess it up. He uses a different verb, but in terms of like NLP, it's all negative type messages that he's sending to himself. But he's saying like, my knees are weak, my palms are sweating, my heart is thumping. I've one chance. If you think of those physical symptoms, knees weak, heart thumping, this magical kind of moment of enlightenment happened for me in all places of Hill 16 in Crow Park in September 2017, when a person called Joe Canning got the slitter with about 30 seconds left. And what that meant was that there was nobody getting the ball off him and Galway were going to win the All-Ireland. And this was one of the most exciting days of my life, I suppose, after the day that I got married, because I knew Galway were going to win the All-Ireland. And guess what physical symptoms I had?
Yeah, the exact same.
So yes, my knees were getting weak. I was blubbering trying to talk, and I was getting really warm, getting those sweaty palms, everything else. The biggest difference was I wasn't one bit nervous. I was over my head excited. So here's our statement. Imagine by the end of this podcast, you will never feel nerves again when it comes to storytelling. So all you need to do is say, I am excited. So whatever presentation's coming up, whatever story's coming up, if it's a date you're going on and you've got to get your own story right, you say, I'm really excited about, landing that point. I'm really excited about wowing the audience. And it builds into all the kind of neuro-linguistic programming. But I want to try and test this out, okay? What Karen touched on earlier, and she's an expert in this, is this cognitive dissonance. So I believe, I don't have a PhD in cognitive science, so that's what I'm saying I believe. I believe that our subconscious brain cannot process the word not. So I want you to think of your brain like an iceberg. About 20% of an iceberg is above the water. Think of that like your conscious brain, the bit that falls asleep at night. 80% of the iceberg is below the water. And that's your subconscious brain. And the subconscious brain is the bit that keeps the engine ticking over while your conscious brain falls asleep. That is the most powerful part of your brain, and it executes orders. It will do exactly what you tell it to do, and it's so powerful. So I'm going to try and test out people's that dissonance between subconscious and conscious brain right now. And I predict total disobedience. Do not think of a red polar bear about to walk in the door behind John in his room at the minute. Do not think of that red polar bear then trying to play the cool keyboard in John's room. And do not think of the red polar bear now sitting back, relaxing on the cool leather couch in John's room. If at any stage you've thought about a red polar bear, that's me messing with your subconscious brain. So let's use the power of your subconscious brain. If you say, I said to you there, do not think of a red polar bear. The not is gone. We just thought of the red polar bear. So from now on, to help yourself, this doesn't just apply to storytelling, it applies to everything in life. Whatever you're planning or you might be feeling anxious about, say out loud, and it has to be out loud because your subconscious brain only understands direct orders out loud. So without getting too, religious about it, but you go, I am excited. Imagine like you're Martin Luther King standing up in Washington being like, I have a dream, that one day I'm going to become a brilliant storyteller. But you say, I am excited about nailing the presentation next week. That, if you can get that together, this is the one thing that people have come back to us. Every time we do a training session, tell stories, key thing is test out your content. We ask, what did you like and what would you wish we change? The likes that have come back over the last 2.5 years, from the plus, or from over 4,500 people, the one that's come back the most is that Céiteach talks an awful lot, but that one actually works. I am excited. It actually works. And it was Karen that introduced me to it way back when.
Wow. Jesus, I think that's probably as good a place to finish as any. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I hope to hear from you again. Thanks for joining.
Stay practicing as everybody else. Take care.
Cheers, folks. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found that this helped you in any way and might help someone else, it'd be great if you could like, subscribe and share it on any of the social medias you're involved on. We do have a website at youngleaders.tech where you can find links to all of our social media accounts. There you can also listen back to other podcasts, meetup recordings and have a look at our reading list where we have a list of books, podcasts and blogs that have been recommended by our speakers. I'm always looking for new speakers as well, so there's a contact form on the website where you can send speaker recommendations if you know of anyone that would be suitable. Again, thanks for listening and I hope you come back to the next episode.